As a father, Joe Hockey cares about his kids.
If you have a home, even with a mortgage, you wonder how your children are going to get a home.
Which is why Mr. Hockey has resorted to begging the Australian electorate.
Please, for the sake of my kids, don't vote for me. I knew it was bad when I went to the Wax Museum and the caveman on loan from Britain said, "You have a housing affordability problem. And you're a developed nation, you say." It doesn't seem very developed, even we had that handled.
In a time when Australia's housing prices have ballooned to 5 times the average wage of Australians, giving us the third most expensive houses in the world.
And look, it's counterproductive to point the finger at anyone. Both parties are to blame.
It's entirely John Howard's fault.
No, if you're all potatoes with a system of roots that when they're stuffed into a suit it resembles a body like me, we wouldn't be in this mess, so there's plenty of blame to go around.
As it was the Smiths Chips fugitive himself that halved the capital gains tax in 1999, which, what a surprise, completely out of character for the Liberal Party, was great for rich investors.
Always willing to give those most in need a helping hand. I am Spudder Teresa.
But not so great for pretty much everyone, as most people don't have excess income to buy investment properties, much less afford posing lessons and how to look like a dead mullet fish in all your photos. So if you were in the market for, shelter, this is a graph of the housing prices. Q Howard's capital gains tax cuts and cliffhanger. An avalanche of thrills or an avalanche of bills. As a result, for the first time in our history, a third of the Australian public and 51% of our youth will never, ever be able to afford a house. To which Tony Abbott says, these are good problems.
Explain to me why they're not, Fraser. Well, as your chief economic advisor, Tony, I'm not really qualified to answer that question. I'm going to have to refer you to my Year 11 English teacher, Miss Wilkinson. Good problem is an oxymoron. Can't have it. So I don't think it's a particularly productive use of my time to explain the economics of what you said when you can't even linguistically say what you just said. Okay, I'll just keep throwing darts at the board, shall I? The best way to make housing more affordable is to keep interest rates low.
Especially when the vast majority of economists agree that a key reason we have a housing affordability crisis is precisely because we're keeping interest rates low. So thinking that's the best way to address housing affordability is the same as believing you can decrease woolly mammoth attacks by bringing them back from extinction, raising them in the middle of the outback, and getting grandmas to come up to them and say,
"Merry Christmas in the Southern Hemisphere, Charlie. I needed you this sweater just in case you get cold."
Then, in the middle of a housing affordability crisis, Tony Abbott went one step further, saying exactly what you'd expect to hear on a Whose Line Is It Anyway game of, what's the worst possible thing you could say in this situation? Let's do it, Tony.
As someone who owns a house in Sydney, I do hope that housing prices are increasing.
No withtraction of statement.
Well, clown, you have to understand that I'm not so much a Prime Minister as I am a Liberal voter who happens to be Prime Minister. And as a Liberal voter, I'm perfectly happy living in my nice, little bubble. However, the unfortunate thing about bubbles, Mr. Prime Minister, is that they pop.
Or in some cases, snap! With economics professors, the Reserve Bank, even Tony Abbott's chief economist, all stating that it is unequivocally the case that the massive inflation in the price of Sydney and a lot of Melbourne's houses are a bubble, caused by investors using places where people should be living in as gambling chips that are appallingly, in many cases vacant, that even worse, because they can pawn off a disgraceful amount of that risk onto the taxpayer with unjustifiable handouts to the rich in the form of negative gearing, and more than anything else the capital gains tax cuts, which are 100% the Liberal Party's design and could be very easily reformed. However, after days of embarrassingly transparent skirting around these blatantly obvious causes, Joe Hockey, clearly back from asking a guy who sells stolen TVs for advice, very patronisingly said, "I know it's a difficult concept for some to get their heads around, supply and demand, but I get it now, thanks to Nico." Don't say my name on TV. But here's our plan to tackle artificially increased housing prices from our policies. You get a good paying job. Probably a mistake hiring the reanimated headless corpse of Marie Antoinette to be his chief speechwriter who entitled his housing affordability statement,
Your plan is to tell a third of Australia to get rich?
Oh, not rich. We're being realistic here. Maybe like a $150,000 a year job, all 8 million of you, and then build more properties.
which according to almost every expert on the issue, increasing the amount of houses would do next to nothing. But that's all fine because Tony Abbott wants houses to be more affordable, clearly, as the Liberal Party has gutted close to $600 million in housing affordability programs, because the age of entitlement is over, except of course to people who don't need it at all, with massive government handouts to some of the wealthiest people in Australia that cost the budget billions upon billions of dollars a year, completely unchanged, that is so perverse they're making the basic need of shelter unaffordable to more than half of Australia's youth, so a few idiot property investors that think it's cool to undo 3 buttons of a collar shirt and say,
Yeah, I reckon I've earned this 4 buttons. That's our black belt, because I earned my wealth the hard way, using welfare. As I have a grand vision of property investors so good at that dead fish look they can wait around at the fish market and go,
April Fools!
Tony Abbott's plan to tackle housing affordability. It's pretty much that.
Please press the subscribe button now. Come on.